and welcome to another episode of PA Voter Information Network. I am your host, Larry DeMarco, and today we are here with Christian Stahl. Christian, thank you for being a guest on PA Voter Information Network.
Thanks for having me, Larry.
Christian, you followed my channel, which I appreciate, and then we finally had the chance to meet in April at, it was Parental Alienation Conference or rally. So, Chris, give me a little bit about your background so people know where you're coming from.
Larry, I have 4 children with my ex-wife, been in Havertown for 10 years. Complaint and divorce was filed by my ex-wife in 2012, and I've been in the courts ever since.
So, about the litigation, who wanted custody? What were you guys fighting over?
Well, you know, we had a unique situation. We were really lucky in that we had the financial resources to both be at home with the children. It was both important for both of us to be around the children as they were growing up. And as a result, we were both home with the kids until 3 months before the complaint and divorce was filed. My ex retained counsel, and in approximately 8 months before she filed the complaint and divorce, and she had begged me to get a job to save the marriage, which I did because I thought a nuclear family would be best for our 4 young children.
And of course, you didn't know that she had spoken to a lawyer at that time, right?
Yeah, no, I was actually operating. I knew that she had spoken to an attorney, but I didn't know that she had already drawn up a divorce complaint.
And this is 8 months in. 8 months before the date the complaint was filed.
8 months before the complaint was filed, she had already met with this attorney several times. The complaint was already drafted, and they held it up while I got a job. Because you know, they strategized if I had a job, then I would no longer be 100% with the kids, and they'd have an advantage in custody, and then they would play that advantage in child support as well.
And of course, this you found out after the fact. You learned that this was advice that she received based upon how things played out.
This has been playing on for so long. When something transpires over 7 years, there's a lot of filings with the court, there's discovery for different things, and so the pieces come together much more clearly now in hindsight than they were at the time when I was going through it.
So you went to work 3 months before the complaint was filed, and what did you fight about in court?
Well, you know, we were going to a marriage counselor because the intent was to save the marriage, and the marriage counselor, well-respected psychologist over in Ardmore, implored us to mediate rather than litigate, and I agreed to mediate, and so did my ex, actually, at that point. She went back to her attorney, who flatly refused to allow her to mediate, and he said, no, litigate, you can get more, and she stopped all discussion with regard to mediation. And it was actually at that point where she received advice from her attorney. He told her not to talk to me anymore, to not communicate with me. And I found out later he'd used that in order to say that I wasn't communicative with her, and therefore I was a difficult parent.
So then let's go into the details, the word details, in terms of how things played out with support, the divorce, and custody issues.
I think it could be really helpful for some of the viewers just to understand what transpires when you get into family court for the first time. I mean, I was a deer in the headlights. I didn't know what any of these filings meant. I had no legal knowledge whatsoever. I was at the complete mercy of my representation. And I get a filing for a complaint and divorce. I get a complaint for child support. Even though we were living in the same house together, she filed for child support. She filed for exclusive possession at the home. These are all standard blocking and tackling mechanisms one does in order to displace the other party early on. I didn't understand that at the time. And then there was, I actually had to file for custody to get seeking shared custody, 50-50. I thought that was fair. I had 100%, but now I'm only with the kids, going to possibly be half the time. And she wouldn't let me see the kids at all, even though there was no court order, so we had to move forward with that.
So then at this point, she had moved into a separate residence.
I had to move out. I moved out of the house voluntarily a month after this was going on because the tension within the house was bad for the children, and I didn't want to have them exposed to that tension, so I felt it would be best if we weren't under the same roof at that point in time.
A month after the complaint was filed?
No, actually this is many more months after it was filed. This is in November. The complaint was filed in July.
All right,
so I moved out November. And then when I tried to see the children, so I'd show up at their swimming, at their soccer events, at their karate, and at the house, she called the police every single time. It was always found that I was behaving well, that there was no issues whatsoever, but she tried to establish the protection from abuse play early on.
You're talking about a playbook. In other words, you believe that she was coached to do things because there was no other reason for her to have behaved in this way.
Right. Well, yeah. So there were, in a nutshell, there's the influence from counsel, and then there was a substance abuse issue for many years, and I think that those two interplayed to have certain things happen.
So, in talking about counsel, let's talk about the resources that you and your wife had. You mentioned that she could be at home during the marriage, and you were home for a long degree until she asked you to go out and get a job. Compare and contrast yours and your wife's resources.
Yeah, so my wife is from a very wealthy family. In fact, the family it probably has a net worth of over $1 billion. She doesn't have anywhere near that, but she has significant funds, enough to finance a politically connected law firm in Delaware County, enough to sustain that representation throughout divorce, custody, and support matters for over 7 years. I, on the other hand, moved out of our marital residence with the clothes on my back, and was quickly targeted to have my remaining disposable income removed through litigious process.
And when you say litigious process, you mean you having to pay for a lawyer, and also tell us about what happened with support.
Okay, so yeah, so I had to naturally pay for a lawyer, and I had to pay for several actually up front. I also had to pay for a custody evaluator. That was a ridiculous amount of money, over $12,000.
For one evaluator.
For one evaluator, and I had to pay $400 a month for a counselor to talk about how to co-parent with somebody who refused to talk to me. And these are all people who are tightly tied to representation in Delaware County. So there seem to be sort of divorce teams that are working in concert.
So when you say, all right, you're making a statement that they're tightly tied to counsel. Do you mean your wife's law firm?
Yes.
All right, now how did you learn this? You're making an allegation, you're making a statement. Did it sometime after throughout the course of litigation, did you investigate this?
Yeah, so the first thing I investigated is, at first I couldn't understand. It's easy to be sitting in a situation and say, well, I'm being typecast as me, right? I look like me, so everybody's out to get just me. And I thought that was unreasonable, so I wanted to figure out, well, why do people end up having an unbalanced outcome in the court system? And so I started looking at following the money. And one of the first, I was successful in having the entire bench of Delaware County recused. The first judge recused.
But what did you find specific? Before you go into actions that you took, what did you learn about the financial ties between, you said counsel and you said other groups?
So, yeah, so I was taking a look. There's campaign finance is available online. And so one of the first things I did was I took a look at the law firm that represents my ex, and I took a look at their political campaign contributions to the sitting jurors in Delaware County. And I found that opposing counsel's firm and opposing counsel himself and opposing counsel's wife in some instances were contributing to the campaigns of the jurists that I was appearing in front of. And they exceeded the amount that should raise a cause of concern as put out by the Judicial Conduct Board. So there was that, and then and I found also that there were tighter connections too. So opposing counsel's firm had a very close association with opposing counsel's firm, and one judge had been a partner with one of the current partners in opposing counsel's firm, and they still owned property together, and that property was being rented to opposing counsel's firm.
So now let's go into what raised suspicion about these connections that caused you to look and find out this information. How were you treated during the litigation process through what people were saying and the orders that came down?
Well, So if I back up to, if I start with what people were saying, I couldn't believe it. My first custody hearing was before a master. I was under the impression that masters could make some kind of decision, but they really can't if you look at the code, which I found out later. And this fellow had the audacity to say to me that you'll never have 50-50 custody. Just, he listened to opposing counsel talk for a long time, took whatever opposing counsel said as truth and testimony and fact and law, and then he told me I would never have 50-50 custody.
And this is before he heard from you?
Yeah.
At this time, did you have representation?
At this time I did. Yeah, that didn't help too much. I was dumbfounded by how my counsel seemed to operate without my interests.
So let's talk about that. Throughout the course of this, it's too much for us to go in step by step. But generally speaking, did you always have representation?
No. So once the impact of child support kicked in, I was paying somebody with vast amounts of financial means, all my means. I didn't have ability to pay for my basic needs, and quickly through these other court taxes, the custody evaluator and the counselors and whatnot,
And attorney fees.
and the attorney fees. Yep, I quickly lost my ability to maintain representation.
So what percentage of the time did you have a lawyer throughout? I think you said 7 years.
So I had representation through 2014, and then most of the time after that I did not.
But you had.
I have a good friend who's an attorney who's jumped in pro bono at a couple points in time
to maybe give you advice here and there, or help out where he could. But bottom line is, for all practical intents and purposes, your wife has this high-powered, connected legal firm, and you're going it alone.
Right. And now she uses that, currently she tries to use that as a sword against me, saying that she had to spend significant amounts of money on her attorney, and that I'm responsible for her having to perfect this litigation over time.
So you were a stay-at-home dad. You went to work for 3 months. What type of support order was entered, and why and how?
Yeah, so I went to work, and I'm the kind of person who tries to exceed in the role. And I was in a sales role, and I made 270% of quota, which gave me a big end-of-year bonus payable in January. And at the support hearing, they said, "Wow, you could make 270% of quota all day," and they gave me an earnings capacity that was approximately 140% over my base pay. Pay is backloaded, so I quickly fell behind and was being reported to the credit agencies for an inability to pay, and they couldn't garnish enough money, and there was no other money to give them. I was living paycheck to paycheck, had to sell things in order to make ends meet. So, and at the same time, my ex was successful in masking her actual income from the court. So representation didn't go into the discovery required in order to find out what her income was or how that would apply to a child support scenario. And we're just sort of getting to the bottom of that today.
So this is support. And well, were you able to file and correct that as soon as they saw that you couldn't maintain that you can file a petition for modification? Did you ever do that?
Oh yeah. So the way that it's you file a form, say, well, what the master came up with, we're going to challenge that. So you have a de novo hearing, and I filed that. You have to do that within 30 days. Within a week, we filed a de novo hearing. This is in 2013. We had a hearing in support. It got delayed a few times by opposing counsel. And sometime in April of 2014, we had a hearing.
Almost a year and a half later.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Right. So the pain continues, right? And then there was reconsideration and another order that was issued in November of 2014, and there still was a lot of pain there. But I lost representation, and they refused to pursue an appeal.
Meaning they maintained this unfair order based upon
the fact that enough money had been taken away from me that I couldn't proceed legally with representation.
So what you're saying is you were fighting in court with one hand tied behind your back, basically.
If not both.
All right. So let's talk about the custody. What happened with the custody issue?
So custody has flipped 9 times in the past 2 years now. Essentially, it was a boilerplate arrangement on the way out. I think what they give the non-custodial parents, the 35% of the time, it keeps you under their numbers. At 40%, you get a discount on child support. So they try and make it under 40% to avoid that kind of discount. They that stayed as it was.
How was it? I thought we were shared parenting, or what happened earlier?
So out of the gate, it was 65-35. I had a hybrid arrangement where I would pick up one child on a Tuesday and have them overnight, one child on a Wednesday and have them overnight, and the youngest two on Thursday and have them overnight, which required me to travel an hour before and after work, back and forth, just to shuffle kids around to school and pick them up and whatnot.
You weren't getting all 4 kids at the same time.
I got them all at the same time every other weekend from Friday night until Monday morning, but I spread them out so I'd have more quality time with the kids.
Okay.
So I argued for that.
Right. But you were not even.
Excuse me.
Yeah, certainly. Even though you were the stay-at-home dad, you ended up getting the 35% of that, and she ended up getting the 65% of the time.
Right. So she positioned. Her representation took advantage of everything he possibly could. I mean, he argued that she didn't have money that she had. He argued that she didn't have custody, that she had custody that she didn't have. And, the master just told me I was going to have 50-50 custody. So I ended up with a big bill in child support. I didn't have a home, and I had a lot of expenses because the children, when they came to my, at that point in time, 2-bedroom apartment, needed things like bed, bedding, toys, food.
So then, to summarize, initially, you married a trust fund baby who had $1 billion to the family name, maybe $1 million to her name. She positioned this so that you went back to work, and then when litigation started, you actually appeared to be a earning spouse having to pay the dependent spouse when the opposite was true.
That's true, yeah.
Because she could afford a lawyer who you didn't realize at the time, but then you researched and found that this law firm was a heavy donor to Delaware County judicial campaigns, and your lawyers, in contrast, were not, but you couldn't afford them beyond maybe a year to 18 months anyway.
Yeah, so the effective range of their representation would wane quickly. They'd start off talking about what they were going to do, and then towards the middle of it, they were concerned about payment, and they would stop any efficacy whatsoever.
All right. So then you started only having 35%, and I understand a lot happened to get to this point, but you now have 50-50. Tell us a little bit in summary fashion how you got to that and some issues that the children's mother had.
Yeah, so my ex had struggles with substance abuse, with alcohol, and there were criminal aspects to that. That was well documented in the court. DUI and endangering the welfare of children. Okay. And she, as she continued to struggle with alcohol, she decided that she would agree to 50-50 custody in order to avoid having a hearing where she would be more scrutinized as to her behavior with the children while under the influence.
And this is how things worked out. You went by agreement to get the 50-50 because of what you had seen up to that point?
Yes.
All right, so where do we stand today?
Well, it got worse, and she eventually sought treatment for her disease. And during this period of time, I had 100% custody of the children.
Did she get back 50-50?
She eventually did, yeah. And it seems magic for her how that happened, because the only question the court seemed to pose throughout was, are you still drinking? Not whether or not you're a fit parent. Whereas the standard for me would have been, are you a fit parent? Not whether or not you're drinking.
Did you always feel confident that the children were safe when they were under her custody?
No, I was very concerned. I was very concerned after her arrest for DUI and endangering the welfare of children. And there were multiple incidents documented by police that showed that she was out of control during this time frame, and I was very concerned.
I hope things are better now.
They are better now, but there's always the risk that there's some recidivism that I don't see. And I won't be alerted to that until something happens.
We've been covering things pretty much in good detail, but I do want to ask you, you've noticed or you felt that there was some ethical behavior on the part of her counsel during the litigation. Can you just give us a little bit about what you felt, what you saw in litigation?
Well, I think attorneys would call it zealous advocacy when they when they argue on behalf of their clients. I think that in this particular instance, the zealous advocacy goes beyond being a big fan and supporter of your client. It oversteps the bounds of ethical considerations. There are contortions of fact and law that are consistent, that have driven outcomes that don't align with what the truth of the matter is, and what the truth of and what the law should be applied against those facts.
And did you argue this to the judge that this was happening?
Yeah, each judge responds a little differently. The recused ones stated that he was an officer of the court and incapable of actually not being honest. But
Right.
even in the face of the truth, that what he was saying actually had no bearing in fact. We're going through this still. I've gone through it for so long that I can recite to you the rules of professional conduct where I have a concern.
And how many breaches did you feel that you saw?
Well, they're so voluminous, starting with the first complaint and ending with the last thing he filed. Almost every filing has some kind of ethical consideration in it. And they range the gamut from just, not telling the truth about somebody's income or assets, to not telling the truth about an event, and then trying to twist that, to his own advantage.
We've discussed this off camera, that you've taken extraordinary action in the face of finding out that your wife's law firm are heavy donors to the judicial bench when they're candidates. Almost all of them, if I'm not mistaken. So you took some effective, dramatic action through perseverance. Tell us about what you did when you followed the money and found the financial connection.
So the second I learned that there were contributions going to the judicial campaigns, I moved to recuse certain jurists. And the jurists can decide for themselves whether or not they want to remove themselves from the case. And one particular jurist sat on this move to recuse for over 6 months. And the opposing counsel filed a response. I gave the documentation that was publicly available with regard to campaign finance. These people, this firm gave your campaign this amount of money, which exceeds the amount that they can give you without raising a concern for recusal. And then I stated that he had, in addition, attended a number of campaign finance events, special events. So, in fact, he was just at another one on October 16th to try and retain this judge. And so what happens is this is dark money. No one sees that. I mean, if they go to some dinner and the judicial campaign benefits from the fact that they were there, they, paid a lot of money for a raffle, all that money just disappears. Typically, they pay more money for a table closer to the jurist who they're seeking to support. That money doesn't show up. And there's a lot of it, a lot more than what you'll see in the campaign finance. This attorney actually responded that he hadn't attended more than 3 of these type of events in support of this jurist, on top of the other number, which already was over the bar required. It gets a little technical. Judges have to report when they're sitting on things for more than 90 days that they could rule on. It turns out that the jurist that I had recused wasn't following the rules, that she wasn't disclosing that that
Financial
she hadn't
connection.
disclosed. Well, she hadn't disclosed that she hadn't ruled on her own recusal, for example, for more than 90 days. And I alerted the Administrative Office of Pennsylvania Courts that stuff was happening. Every filing that I filed with the appellate courts included information that of concern that I had. The relief I was asking for was to have her moved, and then I ultimately I sued 4 of the judges, including the present judge, opposing counsel, and the custody master, who said I would never have 50-50 because they took away my legal. The master took away my legal custody, which he's not allowed to do.
Ultimately, what result did you get?
Ultimately, the bench, the Delaware County bench, was recused, and an out-of-county judge was assigned to my matter.
Again, that's no small feat, and I congratulate you for taking that action. Did you have representation when you did that?
I did not.
You did that on your own.
Yeah.
Now, was there any official ruling that came down to permit this to happen, or was it an official answer to the motion, or did this just happen?
This happened. This happened in the background. The judges were removed. I was informed in December of 2016 that a new judge would be assigned. With regard to the action against the judges, I found that judges are immune from suit. They're immune from any accountability. There's a whole bunch of interesting case law. They can sterilize you, and that's okay. They can put you in jail. That's okay. Everything's okay. They're completely covered.
So, from everything that you've been through,
Mm-hmm.
from having an attorney, from handling this pro se, and from moving to have judges recused, and ultimately being successful with that,
Mm-hmm.
what changes would you like to see in the family courts? Where do you think they need to be more effective?
Well, there's a lot of different things that could occur. I think to begin with, there should be transparency. So I'm a big fan of cameras in the courtroom. If you walk into a courtroom now, they're trying to take your cameras away. They're trying to stop you from being able to see what's actually happening in a courtroom. They've hidden the association between the attorneys in Delaware County and the judges on the docket. They don't want you to be able to look up and find out that this judge and that attorney equals a fairly consistent outcome. That was done deliberately back after I sued the judges. That seemed to have transpired. I think that the code itself, so if there are any legislators out there, the code itself needs to be rewritten. Right now it's in the discretion of the jurist. The jurist is not accountable to anyone, so a judge can do whatever a judge chooses to do without respect to the law. They talk about the best interest factors of the children, and that's codified. And for a judge to comply with the rule, the judge just needs to look at, did I talk about each one of these factors? And then they can weight it any way they want. So there's really no accountability. There's no oversight. There's nobody in the legislature who's protecting your rights in the court system. They've said, that's a sort of separate entity. It's a black box. And if you're in there, good luck. We're not going to help you with that.
That's an accountability point. So,
right.
Transparency and accountability.
Yes.
Where do you stand on shared parenting?
Well, shared parenting, I believe, my own personal experience was conflict for profits, right? So if you can create an imbalance out of the gate, then you can make a lot of people very happy. There's going to be attorneys who are going to generate fees over years and decades, if not more, depending on the age of the children. There's the cottage industry in divorce. There's the psychologist, and then there's these custody evaluators and social workers that all can get involved and get a piece of the pie. They've just added parental coordinators again. Get this, an attorney who's practiced for 5 years in family court can now take a couple of courses and tell you how to parent your kids. So tying this back to 50-50 custody, I believe once you detoxify the environment, if you start off with 50-50, if your expectation is that there's going to be 50-50 out of the gate, there's nothing to really fight for. In fact, I would advocate, much like the common law states, that when you file your $40, $50 marriage certificate with the county, you also stipulate to how are we going to split the money, how are we going to split the kids, and will there be any money exchanged for spousal or child support, and then allow people to update that over time if they feel that something's moved the needle, right? Because then you'd have a stipulation out of the gate, and all of the gamesmanship, the pre-game planning would be taken away, And that would all actually serve the best interests of children who would no longer be in the middle of conflicts that will persist throughout their minority.
And at least any type of litigation will be litigating over a specific purpose, whether someone is unfit. So at least you'll put litigation where it is supposed to be.
Right. That's a good point.
Well, Christian, I wish you the best with any future litigation that you have, and of course with the safety of your family and children.
Thank you, Larry.
And thank you for being a guest on PA Voter Information Network.
Thank you.
Please come again. We are here with Christian Stahl, and I am your host, Larry DeMarco. If you like this video, please share it with the people on your contact list and social media friends. Signing off. Tune in next time. Bye for now.